But whenever he worked alone.
Yeah.
He never had to work with anyone else, even though he was always with his brothers. He did his stuff alone.
When we think of I Love Lucy, we remember the laughter, the charm, and the unforgettable characters who made it one of the most iconic shows in television history. Among them were Fred and Ethel Mertz, played by William Frawley and Vivian Vance, whose constant bickering became a comedy highlight. But while audiences loved their on-screen chemistry, the reality behind the scenes was far darker. William Frawley and Vivian Vance were locked in a feud so bitter that it lasted throughout their time on the show and long after it ended. Their hatred wasn't just playful banter for the cameras. It was personal, sharp, and deeply rooted in something that few people knew about at the time. For decades, fans could only guess what went wrong between the two stars. But now the real reason behind William Frawley's utter dislike for Vivian Vance has finally been revealed. And it's a story filled with shocking details that completely change the way we see this legendary TV duo. William Frawley, best remembered today for his role as Fred Mertz on the classic sitcom I Love Lucy, was born on February 26, 1887 in Burlington, Iowa. He grew up in a middle-class Catholic family of Irish descent, the second son of Michael A. Frawley and Mary E. Brady. His father worked as a brewer, and the family was closely tied to the traditions of their Irish-American community. From an early age, William showed a rebellious streak and a sharp wit, traits that would both help and hinder him later in life. As a boy, Frawley was educated at local Catholic schools in Burlington, where he was introduced to performance through participation in church choirs. Singing was one of his earliest talents, and he took great pleasure in entertaining others with his strong voice. He also developed a fondness for vaudeville-style humor, which was becoming increasingly popular in America at the turn of the century. While his education provided him with a solid foundation in discipline and religious tradition, Frawley often clashed with authority figures and quickly earned a reputation as someone who valued independence over strict conformity. In his teenage years, he held a series of odd jobs, but the pull of performance proved irresistible. He eventually left Burlington for Chicago, where he worked as a stenographer for the Union Pacific Railroad. Yet even while holding a steady job, he was drawn toward show business. His first taste of professional entertainment came when he and his brother Paul formed a vaudeville act, singing and performing comedy sketches in small theaters. Though their partnership did not last long, the experience gave Frawley confidence in his ability to connect with audiences. He continued performing in vaudeville circuits and honed his timing, musical skills, and comedic delivery. During his early 20s, Frawley married Edna Louise Brout in 1914. The couple developed a musical comedy act that they performed together on stage, though the marriage itself was troubled and eventually ended in divorce in the late 1920s. Still, these years marked a formative period in his life as he gained extensive experience touring in vaudeville productions across the country. His stage presence, brash personality, and gravelly singing voice became his trademarks, and they would later carry him into Broadway and Hollywood. William Frawley's life took a decisive turn when he left the vaudeville circuits behind and began to make his way toward the more established stages of Broadway and eventually the screens of Hollywood. After years of constant travel and performance in small venues, he had built a reputation for reliability as a performer who could hold a crowd with his sharp delivery and booming voice. This reputation allowed him to transition into Broadway productions in the 1920s, a period when the American theater world was thriving. He appeared in several musicals and stage comedies, displaying the kind of natural comic timing that had been refined during his vaudeville years. Broadway gave him a stability and visibility that the transient vaudeville circuits could not, and it was here that he began to build the connections that would eventually lead him to film work. By the early 1930s, as the film industry in Hollywood was expanding rapidly with the introduction of sound pictures, Frawley saw an opportunity to bring his talents to the screen. His distinctive singing voice and brusque manner made him a natural fit for character roles in musicals, comedies, and dramas. He moved to California and began appearing in films, usually cast as tough-talking managers, bartenders, or gruff but lovable side characters. Although he never became a leading man, he was in constant demand because he could reliably add color and authenticity to any scene. During the 1930s and 1940s, Frawley appeared in over 100 films, working with major stars and directors of the era, and establishing himself as one of Hollywood's most dependable supporting actors. His Hollywood career gave him financial security and recognition, but it also cemented his image as a performer who specialized in playing blunt, wisecracking, working-class types. These roles matched his own personality so closely that audiences often assumed his screen persona reflected the man himself. By the time he was cast in I Love Lucy in 1951, Frawley was already a seasoned veteran of both stage and screen, bringing decades of hard-earned experience to the role that would define his career for generations to come. William Frawley arrived in New York during the height of the 1920s theater boom, a time when musicals and light comedies dominated Broadway, and vaudeville stars often sought more stable work on the legitimate stage. His strong voice and ease with comedic timing made him a natural fit for the era's musical revues, which relied on lively songs, witty banter, and broadly drawn character types. One of his earliest notable appearances was in the 1925 musical Mary, Mary, which introduced him to a broader audience outside of the vaudeville circuits. He followed this with work in other shows such as Here's How and She's My Baby, both of which showcased his ability to combine humor with musical performance. These stage roles were important not just for the exposure they gave him, but also because they positioned him among actors and producers who had connections in the film industry. The late 1920s was a transformative moment in entertainment as Hollywood was rapidly adapting to sound pictures. Performers with proven stage voices were suddenly in demand, and Frawley fit that need perfectly. His Broadway work gave him credibility as a professional who could hold his own in structured productions, while his years in vaudeville had trained him to think quickly and inject humor into any situation. That combination made him attractive to film studios looking for character actors who could add authenticity and comic relief. By the end of the decade, Frawley had grown restless with the limitations of stage work and was lured by the promise of steady employment in Hollywood. He made the move to California, and within a few years he was appearing in films with regularity. His Broadway period, though sometimes overshadowed by his later screen career, was crucial in shaping his identity as a performer. It gave him polish, discipline, and visibility, all of which would serve him well as he transitioned into the bustling world of early sound cinema. William Frawley's long career in entertainment was not without turbulence, and his reputation off-screen was often as colorful and contentious as the characters he portrayed. One of the most persistent issues that followed him throughout his life was his heavy drinking. Frawley was known in Hollywood as a hard drinker who frequented bars and often let alcohol get in the way of his personal relationships and professional responsibilities. Though he was rarely so unreliable that he lost work, the studios and colleagues around him were aware of his temper and unpredictable behavior when under the influence. This tendency fed into his reputation as a gruff, sometimes difficult man, a reputation that paradoxically made him perfect for the kind of grumbling, hard-edged characters he played on screen. His most famous and enduring rivalry was with Vivian Vance, who played his wife Ethel Mertz on I Love Lucy. The two had virtually no personal rapport, and their mutual dislike became one of Hollywood's open secrets. The tension began almost immediately when Vance, who was younger and considered attractive, reportedly complained that it was unrealistic for her to be married to a man as old and rough-looking as Frawley. He overheard this remark and never forgave her, referring to her with caustic insults for years afterward. Their animosity lingered behind the scenes even as their on-screen chemistry as Fred and Ethel Mertz became beloved by audiences. Both were consummate professionals and delivered stellar performances, but off-camera they had little to do with each other and frequently exchanged barbed comments. Frawley also had a reputation for clashing with producers and directors when he felt disrespected. While working on I Love Lucy, Desi Arnaz was initially hesitant to cast him because of his well-known drinking and volatility. Frawley, however, convinced Arnaz by promising he would never show up drunk on set, and to his credit, he kept that promise throughout the run of the series. Arnaz later admitted that despite his concerns, Frawley had been a consummate professional during filming. Still, stories circulated of him getting into heated arguments behind the scenes or bristling at suggestions he didn't agree with. Another controversy tied to his career was the collapse of a planned spin-off series after I Love Lucy. In 1957, when Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz were ending the original run of the show, There were talks of giving Fred and Ethel their own program. However, the idea was quickly abandoned, in part because of the deep dislike between Frawley and Vance, who refused to work together without Ball and Arnaz as buffers. That cancellation highlighted just how corrosive their feud had become, and it cost Frawley what could have been a lucrative new chapter in his career. Despite his controversies and rivalries, Frawley managed to maintain a steady career because he was undeniably talented and could deliver when it mattered. His grumpy, sharp-tongued image on screen mirrored aspects of his real-life personality, making the line between character and actor blurry for audiences and colleagues alike. While his drinking, feuds, and temper kept him from reaching greater heights, they also helped cement his reputation as one of the most authentically cantankerous figures in Hollywood's golden age. When William Frawley joined My Three Sons in 1960, his career entered its final major chapter, and with it came a new set of controversies tied less to his drinking and more to his declining health. He was cast as William "Bubbo" Casey, the grandfatherly figure who balanced the household after the death of the mother in the series. At first, the casting seemed inspired. His gruff warmth fit the role perfectly, and audiences who had loved him as Fred Mertz welcomed him back to television. Behind the scenes, however, his age and physical condition soon became a source of concern. By then, Frawley was in his 70s and had spent decades drinking heavily and smoking, which took a toll on his stamina. The producers of My Three Sons took out an insurance policy on him because they were worried he might not survive the show's run. Stories circulated that his contract contained a clause allowing him to be replaced if he ever became too ill to perform. On set, he sometimes struggled to remember lines or keep up with the shooting schedule, though he worked hard to maintain his professionalism. His gruff manner, combined with his failing health, occasionally caused friction with crew members who had to adjust to his limitations. Still, he was admired for his determination to keep working, despite his age and reputation. In 1965, during the show's 5th season, his health problems became too serious to ignore. Frawley collapsed on set, and the producers, fearful of his worsening condition, made the difficult decision to replace him with actor William Demarest, who was also a longtime friend of Frawley in real life. The transition was handled carefully, but it was still seen as a sad ending to his time on the show. Though Frawley was not openly bitter about being replaced, the circumstances underscored how precarious his position had been from the beginning. His departure also sparked some behind-the-scenes chatter that his presence had always been a gamble, one that the producers tolerated only because of his name recognition and audience appeal. After leaving My Three Sons, Frawley's career effectively ended. His controversies during this period were less about feuds or rivalries, and more about the inevitable clash between a man who had built his life around performance and the limitations imposed by aging and poor health. He remained a beloved figure to fans, but within the industry, his departure was often discussed as an example of how Hollywood had to weigh loyalty to a veteran performer against the practical demands of running a successful series. William Frawley's personal life was far less steady than his long career in entertainment, and much of it revolved around a complicated marriage and a reputation for keeping people at arm's length. In 1914, he married Edna Louise Broad, a fellow performer who shared his passion for show business. The two developed a vaudeville act together, mixing comedy sketches and musical numbers, and they toured the country as partners both on and off the stage. At first, the marriage seemed like a natural fit since both were immersed in the world of live performance, but it quickly became troubled. Accounts suggest that Frawley's heavy drinking and quick temper strained the relationship, while the constant travel and demands of life on the vaudeville circuit added even more pressure. The couple never had children, and their partnership, though professionally functional for a time, dissolved emotionally well before the marriage ended. By the late 1920s, they had divorced, and Edna left both the marriage and the stage act behind. The divorce was not publicly scandalous by Hollywood standards, but it marked the end of Frawley's only known marriage. After that, he never remarried, and no serious long-term romantic relationships were ever publicly tied to him. Frawley was known to be private about his personal affairs, and while there were always rumors of flings or casual romances, nothing substantial was ever confirmed. His reputation as a heavy drinker and a man who spent much of his free time in bars made him a colorful figure, but not one associated with enduring romantic commitments. Friends and colleagues often described him as gruff and difficult, a man who did not easily let others get close to him. Some suggested that his failed marriage left him uninterested in trying again, while others believed that his lifestyle and temperament simply made it hard for him to sustain a relationship. Instead of family or romantic companionship, Frawley poured himself into work and maintained a small circle of close friends, many of them fellow character actors or industry acquaintances who shared his hard-edged humor. His most significant on-screen relationships, such as the one with Vivian Vance on I Love Lucy, were famously contentious off-screen, further cementing the idea that he was better suited to professional partnerships than personal ones. By the end of his life, Frawley was essentially a bachelor who lived quietly outside of work. Though he was beloved by fans for playing husbands, fathers, and grandfatherly figures on television, in real life he remained a solitary man defined more by his career than by his personal relationships. His marriage to Edna Brote remained the one notable chapter in his romantic life, and after its failure, he seemed to accept that his true devotion would always be to the stage and screen rather than to a partner or family of his own.